where to mount a dash camera. With so many different dash cameras available on the market, sometimes it can be very tedious trying to figure out where to mount your dash camera. As you can see on my windshield here, I have 4 dash cameras, but that's because I'm constantly testing dash cameras all the time. And I've had to find ways to get these into at least the best optimal viewing angle so that they can all be tested. And I also need to have them out of my viewing area so it's not distracting me while driving. So the question is, where to mount your dash camera? Well, we're going to remove all of these dash cameras off the windshield, and we're going to show you with a lot of the different options we have what we would recommend. So we've got the windshields completely clean now. I've removed the 4 dash cameras that I had in my vehicle. Now, what we're going to do is I want you to keep 5 things in mind when you're mounting a dash camera. 1, where is the center of the windshield? Right? We want to try and keep the camera lens as close to the center as possible if we can. Not every vehicle are you going to be able to do this, but keep that in mind. Okay? Number 2, the mount. The mount slides sideways on this one. So if I was to mount it right here, right against this panel, I wouldn't be able to actually take it off. 3, where the wires plug in. So if I was to mount it here, right against this, and then I ran the wires to it, the wires couldn't plug in. I know this sounds silly, but you really need to keep all those things in mind when you are mounting a camera. And believe it or not, I've made silly mistakes like this where there wasn't enough clearance for the wiring. So these are all things you want to keep in mind. The other thing is, make sure it's not in the way of the driver. You don't want to mount it right here, right in front while you're driving. Now you can't see the road safely, and it's a distraction. And the 5th and final thing is having access to the micro SD card. Like I said earlier, if I mounted it against here, now I can't take it off the mount, and I have no access to the micro SD card. So now that we've actually discussed 5 things that I recommend looking at when mounting a dash camera, we're going to go into it. And the last thing that I did forget, and this is very important, is where do the windshield wipers actually cover? Because I always recommend making sure to mount it in a place where the windshield wipers clean the windshield, so that way if you're in a climate where it snows or it rains a lot, like where we are in Vancouver, you can have that constantly cleaning your windshield in front of the camera, keeping it as clean as possible for the lens while driving. So first things first, we're going to go over where to mount Viofo dash cameras. Now, they give recommendations in their manual, but their recommendation doesn't always mean that you have to follow it to a T. We have different recommendations. So as you can see here on my Kia Soul 2020, I have a housing here. This housing has the lane departure warning system, collision avoidance system built into it, and it has the camera built into it from factory that actually monitors out front of the vehicle. So the big thing here when we're talking about this, where do I mount this camera? Okay, so I'm going to start with the A139 Pro. The A139 Pro has the cabling at the top, has the SD card on the side, and this actually rotates for where you can mount it. So realistically, I would probably mount it somewhere around here. That's actually, you have it very close to the center of the vehicle. This is the stem. This actually would put the lens directly in the center of your vehicle. It allows all the connectors to go up top here, and it's a good central place. If I'm driving and I need to hit that emergency record button, it's quite easy to get at. Some people may not like it down here, and if you don't like it down here, that is completely fine. Another recommendation might be over up here up high. See, it's still clearing the windshield wiper area here. So that might be something that you want to do. But those are the 2 places that I would probably recommend to actually mount the A139 Pro in this style of vehicle. Now, every vehicle is going to be different. Some of them won't have this housing, and some of them won't have all this up here. But that is some of the recommendations on the A139 Pro. So now we're going to move over to the A119 Mini. So this is the Mini, And as you can see, SD card is here on this side of the camera. Power connections either on the top on the GPS mount or on the side. Either way, it only has one connection. So you can actually place it all the way up here. You could mount it pretty close to there if you'd wanted. You could mount it underneath here if you want, right here, because you can plug into the side here. You don't have to go into the top on the GPS mount. You can just go on the side, and you could run the cabling right up the side here so it would actually look really nice. And if you don't like it being down below here, you can also mount it up high. So it just depends on really what you're looking to do. Those are just a couple different options, but don't mount it over here because that'll be in your viewing angle. It's going to distract you. So you want to make sure to have it in a good spot. Now, let's move on to the A229. So the A229, the power connection is actually on the other side of the unit as opposed to the Mini, or on the top of the unit on the GPS mount. So those are two different ways that you can actually mount it. And then when you take a look, the micro SD card is over here, as well as the rear camera input. So if you mounted it right against here, you wouldn't get it off the mount. You wouldn't be able to plug the rear camera input in, and you're not going to get access to the SD card. So, like I said earlier, I'd mount it off to the side just a little bit. You have space to plug in those wires, and you have access to the SD card. It also allows it to slide off the mount when you actually mount it there. You can also mount it up high here, which I know not everybody's really seeing that well, but that's the other thing you can do is up high. But like I said, I would keep it out of this area here on the driver's side because that most people are going to find it distracting. When we go over to the A129, the A129, power cable on the top on the GPS antenna or power cable on the side, as well as the rear camera input. Now for me personally, I like plugging in the power cable on the top on this particular unit, and I like putting the rear camera input here as well. And the SD card, like you can see, is on the complete opposite side of the unit. So, like I said, kind of repeating myself, but you could actually mount it here, right near the center of the vehicle. You have space, take it off the mount. You could mount it under here, technically, if you wanted to, and run both cables up here, because there is power cable and rear input on here, as well as if you really wanted to, you can also mount it up high here on the passenger side. So that's pretty much it for the 4 Viofo units that we have, that we stock, and we're going to move on to another brand. So now we're going to move on to IROAD dash cameras. So when we look at the X11, the X11 has a power button on the one side, SD card slot on the other, right? And then all your power cables are right on the top of the unit. So, camera lens is off to the left-hand side. So now, where is the best place to mount this on this particular vehicle? So, a couple things. You could mount it here. Keep in mind, you want to leave a little bit of space here for the wires to actually come out. And this is very close to the center of the vehicle. Now, some people may not like it this low and they may find it distracting. And if you do find it distracting, I would recommend putting it a little bit higher up here behind the rear view mirror on a lot of vehicles, because it has room for all the cables to go up here. It actually ends up looking nice. I used to have it mounted here on this vehicle for a very long time, and then I recently moved it over here, and I'm actually using the multi-kit. The multi-kit is an adapter that will actually hide the wires, and I have them actually going through a hole here that I actually cut into my collision avoidance housing here, right? Not everybody is going to be wanting to do modifications to this. A lot of people are afraid because it has a safety device. That is something that we do on an occasional vehicle here and there. So if you put it up here, like I said, it's more of a common place. You just slide it off It'll slide sideways. Plus, from the driver's side, you actually have easy access to the SD card if you want to take it out of the unit. Now, going over to the IROAD FX2, very similar. You actually have a power button here. You have the Wi-Fi button here, the speaker here, and then you have your rear camera input and DC 12-volt input right on the top. Okay, and this is your Wi-Fi dongle. So you actually have, this is the manual recording button. The power button's on the other side. Correct me, I'm sorry, I was wrong. So very similar to the X11, I would mount it up here, or I would look at mounting it around this location here as well. The main reason why, you're gonna keep the lens close to the center of the vehicle. Here you'll be off center, but it still actually works really well, makes it easy to get access to, and you can still take it off the mount, right, to take it out of the vehicle. Okay, so now we're on to the Thinkware dash cameras. And all three of the Thinkware dash cameras we're going to show you in this video are completely different than each other. So, Thinkware U1000, very popular. A lot of people are familiar with it. All the connections are on the one side. So you have the radar module plug-in, you have your power cable plug-in, the rear camera input plug-in. On the other side, you have the micro SD card, which goes in. So the question is, where do you mount this? Well, most people are probably going to mount it somewhere around here. This keeps it pretty much in the center of the vehicle. It allows all the cabling to go up and hide behind your rear view mirror, which is actually a really nice place. Some people may mount it over here. Keep in mind, you have all these cables, so it doesn't end up looking good. You're going to end up having to have it kind of draped around, and a lot of people, they want it to look clean. Another place that may work is up high here on the passenger side, which I'm just trying to show you guys here. A lot of vehicles we do that because then people won't see it from the driver's side while they're driving, because some people do find anything on their windshield to be a distraction. So keep that in mind. It is going to allow the wires to go up. This mount actually works the opposite way of the other units. So it actually goes, it moves towards where the cabling is. So keep in mind, you actually could have this pretty tight to here if you wanted to, and then you could take it off the mount, so you could actually have the SD card there. Now, I wouldn't have it right tight against it. I would have a little space still. And the main reason why I would still have a little bit of space is just because you want to make sure that all heat gets out. You're not keeping any heat trapped in. You don't want these units to overheat, especially if you're in like Texas, you're in Florida, you're in greater Vancouver. We get our heat waves as well throughout the year. So that's just my recommendations based on this system here and how it mounts. Now we get into the new Thinkware F790. And the new Thinkware F790 actually goes right onto a mount here, right? SD card is on the driver's side, and basically there's no cabling. It all comes out the top because this is all built into the mount here. So realistically with this one here, there's a couple different places that you can do, and your cable management will typically end up looking pretty good with the Thinkware F790. So you can actually mount it here, and as you can see, the cable management will run right alongside it, looking pretty clean. You can also mount it behind the rear view mirror, up high, and you can actually have it snug against here. And the reason why you can have it snug against this here is because it actually pulls down. So you don't have to worry about it sliding sideways like any of the other units. So this actually could allow you to mount it a little bit higher because you don't need to have access to sliding it sideways like a lot of the other units on the market. So just keep that in mind. And the SD card, as long as you have access to this SD card on the driver's side of the unit, then you're game on. It's pretty great. Now, if we move to the Thinkware F200 Pro, this is a totally different mount. Like I said, all three Thinkwares are completely different than each other. So this one here, the mount actually changes up and down. And then if you see here, right here, there's a little dial, and that's how you tighten it to tighten the angle so that it stays stable. I do see a lot of people that install this themselves, and I'll see them and they don't tighten this up, and then what ends up happening is it's flopping around while driving. So it's very important that you do tighten this, that way it stays stable. And the other thing you don't want to have happen, what sucks about these mounts, is a lot of times people mount them like this and they're shooting right up the sky. If you get into a car accident, it's going to catch nothing but the sky. So always make sure when you're with any dash camera that you actually log into the Wi-Fi app, provided they have the Wi-Fi app, or look at the screen and make sure it is actually getting the hood of the vehicle and out the sides. Because if not, what's the point of having the dash camera? It's not recording anyways. So on this particular unit, as you can see, the driver's side of the unit, it has your rear camera input, it has your GPS antenna input, and the power cable input is right here on the top. The SD card slot goes on the bottom, which is actually great. It's just, the only thing that's not great about it is if you flick that too hard and don't catch it, well, it's going to go flying. So just always make sure that if you are going to do that, push and leave your hand underneath so that you do catch the micro SD card. So anyways, on with mounting it. So obviously you can actually mount it close to here. That actually tends to work really good because it is clearance for all the wiring right here. You can mount it up a little bit high as well, right? And some people will mount it up high over here on the passenger side of the vehicle. Keep in mind, this is towards the passenger of the vehicle. So if you do mount it over there, you're going to be off center. Now you're going to be off center by, let's call it like 8 or 10 inches, depending on the vehicle, but it is doable and you are able to. And I do have a lot of clients that will ask for it to be mounted up high there. But when you do that, please make sure that you're watching the line of your windshield wipers, because you want to make sure it is clean. You don't want it mounted over here. Like a lot of people I'll see mounted like over here all the way in the corner. Well, if it's mounted all the way in the corner on the passenger side or the driver's side, your windshield wipers aren't clearing that. So if it snows, it's recording nothing. The other thing is a lot of these cameras only have like, so let's call it 140 degree wide viewing angle. It's not even going to get one whole side of the vehicle at all. It's probably going to get from the center of the hood and one side. So just keep that in mind when you are installing these. You want to make sure, like I said earlier, make sure you log into the app and make sure you are getting good viewing angle coverage. Okay. So we're also now going to lastly look at Blackvue. So Blackvue, they've had this same style for many years. I know when I used to sell Blackvue many years ago, they really haven't gone away from this look, this style, this mounting application. So when you look at it here, you can see it's got the camera. I use the DR750 LTE. I've been playing with it in terms of showing cloud services options. When you look at the plugins, they're all on the one side. Okay, so they're not on the other side at all, so you don't have to worry about anything like that. And the mount here comes off. You hit the lock button, and that's how it comes off. So it only comes off one way, which means you got to be careful on how you mount this thing. So if you're going to mount it, mounting it somewhere like here is probably a very good spot to mount it. The reason why is because it actually mounts it right into the center, and the wiring can run right up alongside your housing, which makes it really good. Now, the way I had it mounted in my vehicle, because I have so many dash cameras, is I actually had it mounted right here. It's a little bit off center, but when I'm sitting here on the driver's side, I can't really see the dash camera at all. It's not really causing any distraction for me. It still allows me to hide all the wiring and plug it in quite easily. So for me, that there, it was a win-win, and it worked really good. So that gives you an idea of how to mount a dash camera on the front windshield. So when it comes to mounting a rear camera on a rear window of a vehicle, there's multiple different ways that can be done. So one way is if you have a hatch, you need to make sure to mount it. You want to make sure to mount it as close to the center as possible in the rear of the vehicle. If it is on a hatch, what I would recommend doing is turning your windshield wipers on and seeing that it is actually mounted as close to the center as possible and it is covered by the windshield wipers. If you do not have windshield wipers, I would recommend having it mounted as high to the top as possible, and make sure that you're trying to avoid the rear defrost lines as good as possible. Usually I try and line it up with the rear defrost line so that it's like just above it, like by like a very little bit. But that's probably what I would recommend doing, is just having it as close to the center as possible in the rear. Hopefully you enjoyed our video on where to mount a dash camera. If you do have any questions at all, feel free to leave a comment down below. We'll do our best to answer them. Keep in mind, this is just a generic video. Every vehicle is going to be different. There is lots of different things. Like my wife's vehicle, the Kia Sedona, has no collision avoidance system built into it. So it's actually an open slate behind the rear view mirror, which allows you a lot more different mounting options. So I hope this video helped you out. And if you do, please like and subscribe. And this is Ben from Safe Drive Solutions, your dash cam specialists. Thanks a lot.